Hi, everybody. I know that Steve is on the call already. I don't know which one of those thumbnails is him, but I'll ask him to join us in a sec.
Hello, fellas. Can you hear me?
Yep, there you are. Okay, give me a sec. Gotcha. Geez, have you read all those books, Steve? I'm very impressed.
How's that? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you well.
Beauty. Read the books? No, but it makes me look smart, you know.
Okay, because that's about as many Netflix series as I've watched in the last 2 years.
Yeah. I've got a massive big screen with you guys. We're a bit more advanced than we were this time last year, so I've got to remember to keep looking at the camera, even though you guys.
Oh, okay, no probs. No, that's awesome. Cool. I'm actually putting together a wine dinner with a winemaker out of Bordeaux, and it's going to be our first one where he dials into a live dinner, and it's probably going to be complete chaos. I'm arranging a screen in the restaurants and et cetera, but by the time he dials in, I'm sure the wheels already have come off the dinner, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah. It'll be our first multimedia wine experience.
Yeah, right. How's the vibe over there, by the way, like with COVID? Are you guys coming out?
Yeah, no, everything seems relatively relaxed from a dining point of view. Everyone's kind of revenge spending and eating out and having a good time. So, yeah life is pretty normal for us. And for you blokes?
No, we're like, it's almost forgotten over here now. It's interesting, restaurants are back, travel's back, people are going out. And the industry is kind of slowly responding by staff coming back off the couch, having watched all
Yeah. How are you for pickers? Because that was a big crisis the last couple of years.
It's been a bit of a challenge, but we got through it. Luckily, it wasn't a very big vintage. It was a fairly small vintage, so
right.
Not too bad. But yeah, like it had been a 21.
Yeah,
pretty large. It could have been
in strife. That might actually be a great segue to kick this off tonight, because the idea, before we jump into this Grenache, which is beguiling me in the glass, the 21, the whole idea of tonight really is to try and deconstruct the estate and get to a deeper understanding of the components of the single vineyards that go into the construction of the estate. What makes this one particularly interesting is when we get to the Pinots, the estate enjoys a higher rating from the same critic at Wine Companion who did all the others. So it's quite an interesting body of work. But that might be the place to start and compare 21 and 20. Now, my understanding of Jane Faulkner and Wine Companion's interpretation of the two vintages was that 21 was definitely a better, more abundant, more stable, even year. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's a big goal, yeah.
Okay. Did you guys have any adverse effects in 20 from smoke, or did you manage to dodge that bullet?
No, from 20, no. The Yarra Valley is one of the few regions that didn't really crop smoke. We were waiting for it. We expected it. It just didn't come, which is great. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, but 20, there was a lot of smoke around, southeastern Australia. Yeah.
Okay.
Yarra Valley was just really lucky.
So 21, even and abundant. 20, much lower harvest, wilder temperature swings during the wintertime, but even ripening, which ended up with lower crops and a really good quality harvest. Would that be about right? Okay. All right, let's kick it off with this Grenache then. It's an astonishing performance, Steve. 97 points, Halliday top 100. And is this a Sanier styled rosé, or what's your approach to the making of it?
No, look, I'm just going to correct you. It's a Pinot rosé, it's not Grenache.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
that's okay. But anyway, because I say that because Pinot makes really beautiful rosé. It seems to have this strawberry kind of musk, really pretty thing when you're making the rosé, and it's absolutely not a Sanier rosé. It's a hand-picked, whole bunch pressed, sort of purpose-made rosé, which again I reckon is part of the charm, really. It's made almost like you'd make a champagne. We basically handpick the grapes, squeeze them, just enough to get a little bit of colour, but not too much. So that's why it's got that lovely sort of pale pink colour. And the pressings, we actually squeeze the fresh fruit a bit harder right at the end, and that then goes into our Yarra Valley Pinot Noir. But what we take for this is the really almost sort of pink kind of free run. Yeah.
You know what's quite delicious about it is it's clearly not a Provence style rosé. It's a Yarra Valley rosé and a Steve Flamsteed rosé, which is really, really terrific. You don't have that overly, and a lot of the Southern French these days are going so into that straw, hay, dry component that they're forgetting about the fruit. Whereas here we're definitely seeing this bright, beautiful, joyous fruit in the glass, which is terrific.
It's funny you say that, because this wine, like 5 or 6 years ago, did begin like a sort of a Provence style rosé that was the real salmon pink.
Yeah.
And, but I think we've probably evolved it into more of a fresh, crisp, like I love that good natural acidity. So we're picking fruit a little bit earlier at about 11.5, 12 Barret, and, trapping in that kind of fresh, minerally, almost crunchy acidity.
Yeah.
And, it's an important part of the style. So it's delicious with anything really, but, I love it with sort of white mold, fresh cheeses. I love it with prawns and seafood. Drinking it while you're just waiting to work out what you're going to drink with dinner.
I think everyone needs as a self-defense in their wine cellar. A wine to drink while you're deciding what to drink. I think it's awesome.
Kind of like, I'm not too sure this is going to go waiting. Then before you know it, the bottles are kind of half empty. Yeah.
I think one of the greatest compliments that I think it was Halliday or someone writing for Halliday wrote about this particular wine is it's a great wine, not just a great rosé. And I really love that because it puts it in context. And probably one of the best compliments one could ever pay to a winemaker, because we all remember the heady days when one could not be accused of ever being seen drinking rosé. Times have changed, but nonetheless, it's great to see it enjoying top billing.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. I just love drinking it, and you're absolutely right. Like, even in wine shows, it used to be this thing about the rosé class, you can't possibly give gold or a trophy. And rosé in the last 10 years in Australia, certainly the last 5 years, it's been, I don't want to say it's been taken much more seriously as wine, because people still smash it and drink it.
Yeah.
Wine making, there's a lot more care and attention to details going to the wine making, right back to the fruit source. So, the wines have been made with more of a level of seriousness, even though it's still just a delicious drink. Yeah.
Those of you on the call, Lou, unfortunately, has had to hear the story about 20 times. But one of the best emails I've ever received in the 15 years that we've had the business would have been in the early days, in response to an invitation to buy a Barossa rosé, and the guy wrote, "This is great, but please, I know you have clients of yours that are in the same rugby club. Please don't tell them that I'm buying this rosé, or I'll never hear the end of it." And I think back in the sort of, the 2008, 2009, that really encompassed the attitude of the consumer towards rosé. But times are way different now.
Yeah, you see plenty of blokes drinking rosé in Australia now. No worries.
Oh yeah, there's absolutely no stigma now.
Yeah.
In fact, I was at a dinner party where someone made rosé jelly at the end of the night, which was just amazing. It's everywhere in dinners and whatever now. All right, let's move on now to the Pinots. I guess the test that the comparison I'm trying to draw with these is relatively unfair, because the estate is a 21. All the rest are 20s, with the exception of the Tassie one, which is 19. So I guess the single vineyards are somewhat at a disadvantage, because we're going to see what appears to be a more idyllic vintage coming out of the estate blend. But bouncing off, in fact, guys, maybe if you can keep your jar number 2s, I guess your benchmark wine for the night, just to try and see if you can break down or come to a deeper understanding of this. So the estate is 60 upper Yarra and 40 lower, is that right?
That's right. So upper Yarra meaning, above about 220 metres above sea level. And lower Yarra is it's not really low in so much as they are between 100 metres and sort of 180. So the lower part of the Yarra Valley. Yeah.
So of these three single vineyard sites, the Applejack and Primavera, would they both be considered upper valley?
Very much so.
Sexton lower.
Sexton lower, exactly. Yeah.
Right, okay, got it.
The Gruyere Hills. Yeah.
Okay. And I think that for my own purposes for the last few years of tasting these three single vineyards, the characteristics of the Applejack and the Primavera have always come through with that sort of elevated, nuanced kind of component. I hate to reference Burgundy, but possibly leaning into into that sort of elevated, lacy kind of tannins, whereas the Sexton is more of that bone or bottom end of Burgundy, geographically speaking, where it's more about the mushroom and the truffle, and that's really been how I've kind of variated them in my own mind.
Yeah, like a lot of people, do just find it a bit easier to use that parallel, like the Burgundy parallel, and that's totally cool. Like, what I guess in my mind, the lower Yarra, so the lower hills are getting a bit more sunlight, and those vineyards facing north, they're getting more sunlight sort of morning to night. They're developing more colour, they're developing more tannin. There's a bit more wind on those sites too, so wind also develops tannin and probably strengthens the colour a little bit. So generally, Sextons are darker, more sort of brooding Pinot than the upper Yarra wines, which see a lot less sunlight, much cooler temperatures, a bit more humidity. They're ripening much more in the autumn season, and they are probably more, Sextons probably doing a bit more ripeness in the summer season.
Right.
So everything's cooler and more, I guess that sort of leads to much more nuanced kind of perfumes and more ethereal things, but not at the expense of sort of mouthfeel and palate. I still find those upper Yarra wines quite powerful, but just not as dark and tannic. So it's a different kind of mouthfeel and kind of.
And also, I think the upper valley, for my mind, lends a kind of a notion of there's a crunchiness or granite kind of texture to or bite to the wine, whereas the lower valley is somewhat more rounded and generous, I guess, got its elbows up.
That's a good way to describe it. There's probably a bit more flesh and muscle on the lower Yarra ones, so they're a bit more robust, and the upper Yarra wines are more driven by their crisp acidity and perfume. And like I said, what's surprising, people look at the upper Yarra ones and they smell them and look at the colour. The colour's a bit paler.
Yeah.
Kind of like going, okay, they put it in their mouth, and then it's got this lovely velvety sort of silky mouthfeel. So they are not light body wines, but they just don't have quite that muscle that the lower Yarra, like the Sexton Vineyard, has.
Yeah, I still make that mistake, looking at a wine and thinking, and making a value judgment long before I should, which is clearly not right.
Hey, Robert, sorry, have you revealed like which one of these numbered wines is which? Because sure
you'll see in the chat room 1 through 5 with the wines and the prices and what have you. It's not a blind one tonight. Really, all I'm trying to do, mate, is break down the components that go into this estate and see if we can pick it up.
Can you post it again? Because I can't see it in the chat.
Oh, okay. I'll ask Lou to do that. You did it for us a second ago. We'll do it again. Okay, let's take a look at that estate, Chris. One of the interesting definitions that I unearthed for it was modern. It's a representation of the modern Yarra Pinot Noir. What are they referring to there when they make it?
I think modern mean, like, if you go back in sort of a bit of time, when Pinot was first planted in the Yarra Valley, it's probably in the late 60s, 70s. A small amount of Pinot was planted, probably quite a lot more in the 80s and sort of early 90s. And I think a lot of the winemakers making Pinot in the Yarra were probably trying to emulate what they'd seen over in Burgundy. So they were They were probably crushing fruit. They were probably doing a lot more physical manual plunging or punching down that you sort of hear, Pinot Noir winemakers referring to.
Yeah.
Trying to extract tannin colour, make wines that are probably sort of more towards the medium body. And I think what we refer to as maybe modern Pinot Noir making is very careful fruit handling. Everything's hand-picked. In a lot of cases, it's either de-stemmed or not de-stemmed, but the berries are rarely crushed. So you might see tanks full of whole berries, cold soak, carbonic or semi-carbonic maceration, almost no punch downs anymore. Generally, people are doing draining returns or, mini yellow star.
Gravity fed stuff. Yeah.
yeah, try and keep that intra-berry fermentation happening, which comes with, which produces, higher levels of perfume, a lovely viscous sort of silky mouthfeel. That's one of the products also of both wild fermentation and carbonic maceration. And just making, sort of more elegant perfumed wines rather than trying to make something that we don't really have naturally a great deal of tannin in the Yarra Valley. So rather than trying to extract tannin into those sort of bigger styles of winemaking, I think winemakers are learning in the modern era to probably just try and tease out perfume and elegance. And, if you put Yarra Valley Pinot into a tasting of, New World Australian Pinots, sort of with Tasmania, and we'll see one of those later on, even Peninsula, the Yarra Valley will always be the more perfumed, ethereal, kind of prettier wine, and often a bit paler, probably takes a bit more time to understand. Yeah.
I think definitely comparing the estate number 2 to the Sexton number 4, I am maybe recognizing that roundness, that firmness, and in fact, it's quite overt in the 20 Sexton. That sort of deep darkness or wet fruit, a wet soil kind of component to it.
Yeah, and just remember too, I think you referred to it before, but we're looking at a 21 estate wine, but then we're going so a warm, generous, relatively high yielding, but lots of flavour, and a warmer year, back to the 2020 single vineyards, which was extremely cool and very low yielding year. So not extremely different years, but some big differences in those two vintages. Yeah. Could
you say that it's correct that in the cooler years you're going to, with a lower yield, you're going to see a more intense example? Is it something that's more focused and more concentrated?
Tense is a good description, I reckon. There's more tension in the 20s, and they've only really relaxed in the last sort of 4 or 5 months, to be honest. So, and I feel like they've got somewhere to go still with 20s. They're going to be beautiful wines. I quite like that young, crunchy, nervous kind of energy the 20s have, but whereas the 21s will hit the ground just like boom, delicious straight away. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the thing that appeals to me so much in the Applejack, is that kind of crackly tension that seems to prevail even over time. I was looking at an 18 the other day, and that sort of electric kind of component still seems to prevail. Now we're 3 years down the track. It's a personality that's innate in that site.
Yeah, and everyone knows what order the wines are in.
Yes,
Applejack, every single vintage, regardless of whether it's 18's of beauty, so I love that wine. 19 was more powerful and kind of robust. 20 cool and a bit more crunchy and sort of ethereal, and the 21's kind of like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears is kind of right in the middle there.
Yeah.
But, Applejack, every single vintage seems to have that. It's almost a brambly kind of. There's a lot of truffles and mushroom and compost and those sort of earthy characters that seem to come through. Red fruits, so red berries, more than sort of dark blueberries.
Yeah. I hesitate to use the word feral, but because that's a negative connotation. But there's the wildness that kind of almost like a mulberry. The wild fruit seems to be something that sits in my head every year.
I quite like the word brambly too. It always reminds me of something that's brambly, that's sort of undergrowth and forest undergrowth.
Yeah.
You've probably noticed too that the 20 single vineyard wines, in terms of their colour, they're much in that paler spectrum, and that's just a function of a very cool year. Grapes produce colour, anthocyanin, and tannin in response to sunlight. It's almost like the sunscreen they develop. So when you get these higher altitude vineyards in a cooler year, you're automatically going to get less colour. But what you gain is like higher levels of sort of perfume and more sort of pretty musk, rose petal, all those kind of characters.
Right. I can see why the lower valley vineyard gets less of a look in this blend, because it has such a powerful voice. I can see why you don't let, in the estate blend, don't let it dominate. It must be quite a challenge. Does that 60-40 split change year on year, or is it something that you kind of stick with?
It's usually sort of, somewhere between sort of 60 and 55 up the Yarra,
right?
And, 40, 45 lower. That's partly to do with where our vineyards are planted and how much Pinot we have, but we're definitely sort of geared a bit more to the upper Yarra for Pinot and Chardonnay would probably geared a little bit more to the lower Yarra. So
Right.
it seems to be the best. That's taken us 20 years to get there to sort of work out that's the best mix for us, the giant steps. We would like one more vineyard in the upper Yarra. We'd like to find one that's really, really high, up sort of 400 or 500 metres. That'd be great.
You wouldn't replant Harry's into a Pinot vineyard, would you? That's super high vineyard where your Syrah is.
No, I think if we ever have to replant that one day, we might put in a few Rhone varieties like Grenache, Carignan.
Cool. Yeah.
It's a bit funny. So that's a global warming kind of antidote there.
Yeah. In fact, we'll talk about that a little later when we get to the Tasmanian one. The other thing that comes through really strongly and surprisingly, maybe it's just my bad glass washing techniques here tonight, but the Primavera is showing just a little bit of reductive component, whereas the Sexton and the Apple don't. It might just be my glass. It's not in a bad way at all, but it's, I don't know if anyone else in the tasting is seeing that. That's jar number 5. Just the finest, Lou often refers to it as struck match. It's got that.
Almost a bit of, struck, almost Chardonnay struck match, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right,
It's
I've seen that before, yeah.
This is the one that Jane often defines as the prettiest of your single vineyards. For me tonight, I tend to, my default setting is always Applejack. And for me, that seems to present, I just like that minerality to the Applejack, whereas the laciness of the Primavera, probably just for me personally, is just a close second in terms of personal preference.
Yeah, we do probably about the same level of whole bunch or whole cluster fermentation in both those wines. And I think I just see a touch more of it in that Primavera, a bit more of that Campari kind of orange rind,
Oh, that's a cool definition, yeah.
Just another level of sort of, arguably another level of complexity in that wine, probably compared to the Applejack. The Applejack's got that sort of, brambly, earthy, truffly thing, and the Primavera tends to be more, orange rind I can see in that wine, a touch more musk and just sort of plain cherries. Yeah.
I'm a big follower of orange rind because I like to drink Negronis. The sad reality of Negronis in Singapore, however, is you can't dry your orange rind in this outside here because it's too humid. I've sacrificed way too many oranges to the cause. So I'm going to befriend someone with a dehydrator. So anyway, I can get it done properly here.
Yeah, and that's a really important component in a good Negroni, the dried orange.
Oh yeah.
Robert, just set your oven at 90 degrees and put your orange slices in it for an hour.
Mate, I've tried that. I've had the Fire Brigade here. It's a total disaster.
Works for me.
Does it? And then how long? And how long do you leave it? How long do you leave it? A couple
for
of
like
hours.
at least an hour.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll give it a go. Because I find in Spain, you put it out in the morning, it's ready by cocktail hour. It's no problem. It's a different kind of sun there.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, Steve. Back to the Pinot.
Actually, I've got a quick Steve, sorry. It's Lou. Hi, mate.
Hey, Lou, how are you, mate? Good to see you.
Not too bad at all. Listen, one of the things I remember in our last tasting, and if you remember Grant Dooley, who's now returned back to Victoria, actually.
Yeah.
But he and I were getting all nostalgic about musk sticks. Remember?
Yeah.
And especially how in Applejack and Primavera, it was really quite a prevalent thing. Now, I'm finding, and that was in the 2019 vintage, I'm finding that with the 2020, that's really not there in this vintage, but I am picking it up in the 2021 estate blend.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Now, is this a function of the warmth of the season? So does that primary note of muskiness come out more with the heat of the season? So 19's more expressive, 21's more expressive. So, the estate is getting the benefit of that extra ripening, I guess, as opposed to the 20s? Or
that's a good call. I hadn't even thought about the mustic comment. We do use that expression around the winery still, but I remember you and Grant bringing it up last year with the 19s, I think.
I think belly dancers were mentioned or something. I can't quite remember.
it's all about spice, right?
Yeah, there was a larger picture involved.
Yeah, but no, the 19s to me were very. They had, especially the Primavera and the Applejack, had that really musky element, which reminded me of being a school kid. Whereas belly dancers, unfortunately, do not. But in the 20th, not quite as pronounced. But is the forward for 2021 is that we could expect those notes to be more prevalent again?
Yeah, like I'm going to go and taste the 21s tomorrow. We're releasing the 21 single Vineyards in about a month, and we're going to do a bit of a release tasting around the country. But I think 20 was a really cool year, so like almost quite a cold year. So I guess some of those flavours that come with ripeness at certain temperatures, just, you know, they're different to 2020. There's a finer sort of crunchy texture to the wines, and there's also a more sort of, it's more of a floral perfume in the 20s than we saw in the 19s. So, you know, just one of those things with the vintage, really. It was a crazy year, 20. I can just remember it sort of sitting there hoping that the grapes are going to get ripe one of those years. And of course, you know, just a long, slow season. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the wines have turned out fine. You know, great job. But they are extremely different to the 19s. There's no doubt about it.
The 20s out of the box, and I feel like the 20s will be the kind of wine you might pull out in 4 or 5 years and just go, oh, hang on a second. You know, one of the cool years are always, they're really restrained. They just take some time to come around. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't explode out of the glass like, you know, the 19s grabbed you by the throat and just whipped you around a bit, right?
Yeah, and the 21s will be the same. 20s are just a little bit like, they're a bit more like, just wait for me a little bit, you know, like those kind of wines, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
That Sexton now, after more and more time in the glass, loving the suppleness. There's a kind of shimmer to the wine, a beautiful texture in the mid palate that certainly differentiates it from the Applejack and the Primavera.
Yeah. I mean,
mate, are they all facing? I guess they're all facing the same. I always ask this question and make an idiot of myself, but they're all facing in terms of the angle to the sun. Are they all pretty much the same?
The Applejack and Primavera are both sort of north-northeast.
Right.
Sexton is due north, and of course north, you know, for us means that the sun goes northeast or northwest as it sets, so they get a full day of sunlight.
Got it. Okay.
The idea in the Yarra Valley, particularly back in the 90s, was it's a cold climate, you know, a cool climate, so let's expose the grapes to as much sun as we possibly can. It's like your solar array in the Yarra Valley, you make sure you're facing due north, you know. And that was the theory with the grapes. They ran they planted the rows north-south, so that, and on the slope, so that really you know, the leaves, which are really the solar panels, are copying as much sunlight as they can as the sun goes east, northeast, and northwest. Yeah. Beautiful
in the Sexton, beautiful. What are those mushrooms that you rehydrate? Waimun or Lou, you might know. What are those Japanese mushrooms that you put water on? Shiitake. It's kind of that shiitake fattiness in the upper palate on the Sexton, which is really delicious and differentiates itself so much from the other two.
Yeah, it's a really cool description. Just as soon as you said that dried mushroom, like it's there.
No, it's delicious, right? And it almost coats your top palate in a way that the other two don't approach. They just have different stories to tell. But it's terrific to pick it up in this.
Yeah. Move this computer.
You know, they always say at a wine tasting you should see where the empty bottles are. And I've necked the Sexton before the other two, which is quite atypical of me.
You know, well, in some ways that makes sense. It's a warmer vineyard in a cool year. So, you know, it's going to be the year that Sexton really shines, those really cool years like 20.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Applejack and Primavera and the Wombat Creek 20 was just like it only made a tiny amount. It probably didn't get over you guys, but
we didn't get me, Steve. You were too mean-fisted.
I think we made like 100 cases and it all disappeared to sell it all.
So we would have been good for just 30 cases. Come on, we don't want it all.
Where's the love? No love whatsoever.
So Steve, the Wombat altitude-wise, where does that sit in the matrix?
It's 400 metres. That's pretty high. And Applejack and Primavera are just hovering below 300 metres.
300. Okay.
400 is pretty marginal. Honestly, Wombat Creek in 20 it just got right. We picked it at 12.2 Bonnet.
Right.
And, but it was a cool wine, but it was, out of the box, and we had a tiny yield. We literally brought in, I don't know, 1.75 tons of fruit. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a fair sprinkling of the Sexton and the Primavera still on the site of the 20s. There's 12 Applejack left, unfortunately, and then it's done and dusted for good, which I'll be sad to say goodbye to. But let's talk about Tasmania now, the Fatal Shore. So is this a conscious move on Giant Step's part for eco-insurance? Is this what, the same way that Brown Brothers is making this move to Tasmania and all the others?
Yeah, look, it's probably equal parts that, but also just plain old curiosity. We've made a wine at Central Otago, which I think we may have shown you guys.
Yes, yeah, I remember. Yeah.
If you make Pinot, if you grow and make Pinot in Victoria or in Australia, really, kind of mad if you're not looking at Tasmania, because you can't go any further south. So as warmer, that's going to be the coolest and probably most stable climate. The other cool thing about the Cold River Valley, which is right down near Hobart, if you've been to Hobart, is it's quite dry. Like, it's cold and sunny, but I think the annual rainfall is something like 450 millimetres. So,
Does that emulate the conditions in Patagonia? Because I'm reading about interesting stuff happening down there for Pinot Noir as well, where it's super dry. But what survives is quite interesting in terms of Pinot Noir.
Probably not similar, actually. The difference probably is the altitude. That Tassie, well, certainly Cold River Valley is only really about 100 metres in altitude. As Patagonia vineyards are pretty high, aren't they? Yeah. But so there's no disease pressure. The cool thing about having that latitude too is, you get much longer summer days. So we might get, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but we might get 11 hours of sunlight, and down there in the middle of summer, they're getting 12 and a half hours of sunlight. They're getting that extra time.
Yes.
Sunlight down there certainly is more intense. I've been down there on a cool day, you walk around the vineyard, get back in the car, and you're like,
you're burnt.
How do I get sunburned? And it's cold. So the grapes are receiving that sunlight, but they're ripening very slowly. So the temperature medium, the average temperature is quite low. Sunlight hours are relatively high, extra colour, long, slow ripening. There's all these sort of different matrices going on in southern Tassie, and I find it really exciting. So, what we'd love to do in the long term of Giant Steps is have, 4 or 5 single vineyards in the Yarra, and probably 2 vineyards down in the southern part of Tassie would be pretty cool.
Okay. Will you go outside Cold River? Will you look somewhere else?
I think we'll stay in Cold River, because we've had a look in Huon. Not convinced for us the north is the right place to be, and I just there's something special about the Cold River Valley. Yeah. If I remember correctly, that's where Domain A sits. If I remember correctly, we are Nocton Vineyard is probably 1.5 kilometres from Domain. Right. Okay. Just down the road. But you've got Cooley, Cold Puddle, Stargazer, Sam Conyers brand, Jim Shadow. Yeah, a couple of
Dominic Portet, I think maybe.
Yeah, I think Portet has some stuff there, and Peter Dredge, Dr. Edge, he's got his vineyards down there as well. So it's an interesting part of Tasmania. Yeah. There's
a question from Hasheng about the overnight in refrigerated containers for the Fatal Shore. He's asking, is it equivalent to a cold soak experience for the grapes?
No, it's not. And that's a good idea. We thought about that, but what we found is Tasmania is a state that's basically its market is the mainland of Australia. They're very good at getting produce off the island, so they've got incredible logistics set up. So when we did our first experiment down there, I just rang up a couple of freight companies and said, could we get a refrigerated container to the vineyard and then have them pick the fruit into that container? That container is then picked up on midday on the same day of picking, driven to the northern part of Tassie, goes on the overnight ferry, refrigerated all the way, and it's in small perforated crates, and arrives in the Yarra Valley at our winery the following morning. So basically, it's like picking fruit and putting it into a cold room, and then bringing the cold room across.
Okay. And then really, no derogation in the quality of the fruit, really, at all.
No, in fact, it's just like it's almost like picking the Yarra Valley. It's like 12 or 14 minutes later. Yeah.
Lou's asking, are you guys still making a Central Pinot, or was that purely experimental?
No, that was an experiment, yeah. And look, I'd love to keep doing it, but we couldn't make the sums work. You know, once you fly over to New Zealand 2 or 3 times, look at the vineyard, and you've got to make so much wine to actually cover the costs. It was never going to work. So
Yeah.
it was good fun. I had a great time. Yeah. Maybe one day. Yeah.
So having a look at this fatal, the one thing that seems to resonate with me is soy and maybe some balsamic, which is unusual in Pinot. It's not something I normally pick up, but the soy is definitely playing for me. Dark, intense fruit, very different, clearly different from anything else that we're looking at tonight.
Yeah, I think the soy is quite a nice description, actually. Like, it's got that, particularly if you compare it to the Yarra, but it's also very dark. It's a dark cherry fruit profile.
Yeah.
But there is kind of almost a tarry kind of overlay to that.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I think you're right. Soy's kind of
Gunpowder. We get gunpowder.
Gunpowder. Now that's an interesting one. Yeah, I'm just going to get onto Amazon Prime straight after this, honey, to get my hands on. So, do you know what? There used to be a steak restaurant in Singapore that sold gunpowder rumps, and I actually ate it once, so I know where you're coming from.
What's involved in a gunpowder rump? What's the deal with that?
Mate, I don't know. It sounded like a whole lot of marketing, and I'm the kind of person who can never walk past the lady in the supermarket with the sausages on the sticks. I just can't. I have to hear the story. I have to buy. Yeah. So that's the reason why I bought the gunpowder steak. I think I would have preferred just peppered steak, really. I don't think it added much to it, but there was a great story nonetheless.
So literally like gunpowder on the steak before it goes onto the grill? Or?
Yeah. I'm sure the health and safety people would have a nightmare, but I remember clearly asking, the restaurant's no longer there. It might have been the reason why it's no longer with us, but I remember it was definitely their signature steak at the time. John, when you talk about gunpowder, are you finding some kind of a textural? Are you referencing something textural, or is it just a flavor?
No, on the nose.
On the nose.
I do find this the most chewy, though, of all the vineyards in the mouth. Yeah. I don't know if that's the added gunpowder or what.
But Steve, was there more whole bunch action in the Tassie Pinot?
Reminds me of red skins.
What was that last comment?
So it reminds us of red skins, you know, the Londons?
Yeah. That sort of, and one of our young winemakers here sort of described it as red licorice almost.
Okay.
There is a bit more bunch in this, and it's a different version of bunch or cluster than we see in the Yarra Valley. It's more of a sort of a savoury kind of, it's soy kind of licorice thing that goes on when these grapes go through a whole bunch of fermentation. That gun smoke or gunpowder, I almost see as like a struck rock, you know, when a rock hits a rock, a bit of that character. Flinty almost, yeah.
Flinty, that's the word, flinty.
It's a wine that's really cool with, like it stands up to some serious food with them. Yeah. The Yarra Pinots, we're often talking, you know, like chargrilled quail or, you know, dishes that are a bit lighter, high in flavour but lighter in texture. But that when it comes to the Fatal Shore, I'm really happy to put that with a piece of.
Mate, what's great about Fatal Shore, Steve, is that you have that sort of big sappy kind of component, but the characteristic of Giant Steps, this gentle softness prevails. And generally speaking, when people are throwing whole bunch stalks into the ferment and they're looking for that big ballsy Pinot, you don't get that gentleness. And so I quite like the juxtaposition in style and the impact that you've made on a completely different terroir. It's very interesting for me because clearly the house style is still there.
Yeah, look, and that house style, I mean, it goes right back to when I first learned to make wine. It was in Côte de Bruy in Beaujolais, and everything there is whole cluster fermentation. So there's no crusher, there's no plunging, there's no mechanical work on the cap. And, you know, that Gamay is quite a light grape. It's quite a light coloured, you know, light skinned grape, and they make this beautiful perfumed wine. So when I arrived in the Yarra, I just thought it kind of made sense to follow those same techniques, and that's always been our winemaking style. Whole cluster or whole berry, but never crushed and never plunging.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting to see that pulled together as part of your body of work. It's you know, really interesting experience. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, the other good thing is, you know, these vineyards now 25, pushing 30 years old. And when vineyards get to that sort of, low 20s to sort of 30 years of age, they really do get their roots to a special place. So, we don't really need to do a great deal of crop manipulation or really even canopy manipulation these days. They just seem to hit a sort of a level. They produce about 2 tons to the acre in a normal year.
Well, I was watching our recording from last year where you raised this issue about the Giant Steps vines getting to that sort of magic moment where they're starting to show a level of maturity that hasn't been manifest before. And it's certainly something that's now definitely reaping its dividends in subsequent vintages. It's really been, it's very clear to see.
Yeah, and it means when you hit a bit of a challenging cool year like 20, it's almost like the vines sort of self-regulated. So they set a very low crop in 20, and it was a cool year, so it was a bit of a struggle for the vines to actually get that crop right. But it's like it's almost like they're reading the season as they Just quite cool to think they have that ability, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, I think you're selling yourself a little short. A lot of it comes down to viticulture and your skill in the vineyard, no doubt. It's not just about the vines.
Yeah, I mean, the big decisions now for us, like the winery's like the kitchen, everything works pretty well. The methods are all fairly established. The biggest decisions now for us, vintage, for me particularly, is walking vineyards and tasting fruit and going, let's leave that for 2 more days. Let's get that one tomorrow.
Exactly, yeah.
That's the really
That's the real call. I don't know, Lou, if you remember when we were in Central Otago about 1 million years ago, we were talking to one of the winery owners who had a celebrity winemaker, and we were saying to her, it's all about John Brown who makes your wines, and she cast us a beady eye over a glass of Chardonnay. She said, I won't use the first word that she said, but I still get to call when the grapes come in, and that's a vital call.
That's the one, totally.
Yeah.
The longer involved in winemaking, the more I'm convinced that, well, A, it's all in the vineyard, that's for sure. But B, the most important job of a winemaker's entire year is the picking decision. It's the most important, it's critical.
Jeez, it must be hell. I can't even choose toothpaste. I would be a complete disaster. But Steve,
the picking window some years is quite narrow. Some years is like 21, it's a bit bigger, but years like 20 sort of like came down to which day, this decision between really a good pick.
Well, yeah, with the climate being so incredibly tempestuous, you hold back 24 hours and it could be a genius stroke or it could be a disaster. These are, and you've got millions and millions of dollars riding on those kinds of decisions. It's not something I'd like to deal with.
Yeah.
So before we leave you, I guess the jury's out as to whether the age-old debate about single vineyard versus estate, right? What the winemakers and the owners always love the single vineyards, and the marketable label is always the estate. And I guess that's from a marketing point of view, that shall always remain. But it's been really great to pull this apart tonight, Steve. And I would say that it's given me a far clearer understanding of the 3 single vineyards for sure, and the role that they play in the estate blend. Thank you for that.
Oh, thanks. And it's always a matter of squeezing as much as we can to this like an hour, but because we could talk for a long time about each individual site, and but ultimately, like if you guys ever get over here to the Yarra, like give us a yell, because we'd love to show you a couple of these.
For sure.
More sense. Yeah.
And if you've got a set of those 21s, I know of 24 people online tonight who'd love to see them when you do the Australia release. So let us know. It'd be fantastic to see
let's
that.
talk about that, because they're releasing in Australia in June, sort of mid-June. So
That'd be amazing. Because
because
with a bit of luck, we'll still have the estate 21. It'll be even a more focused examination of what you've done for these particular vintages. It'll be very interesting. Thank you.
There's a bit more 21 too. It made a bit more volume, so hopefully they'll last a little bit longer than just a few months.
There shouldn't be any problem about the 21 being having inventory. But Steve, we've got a question. What's this pack of green stuff you put in front of us all? What's
Oh,
this?
shit, sorry.
It's his roadie.
That's my 4-pack of cans I need to take home tonight because my fridge is empty. Yeah.
Oh, because we were hoping that it might have been a revelation.
The Giant Steps
Or
release.
something.
No, but that is, that's Phil and Harry's Phil's son. That's Matilda Bay. They're making some fantastic beer on site.
Oh, fantastic. Oh,
Yeah.
that's great.
Well,
Yeah.
given the pedigree of the family, the Sextons, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
okay.
Sort
Now-
of makes it.
They know there's
Now,
stuff.
if you don't mind us being a little bit controversial for a second, well, perhaps not controversial. So we understand that your role is changing over the next little period, and Mel's coming in as the new winemaker.
That's
You want
right.
to give us your thoughts and ideas around what's going on there?
Yeah, well, it's sort of, I'm 56 now, and I've still got, plenty of energy, but I want to do a few more projects. Like we spoke about Central Otago before, and I want to dabble a bit more in other regions. So we brought Mel in to run the winemaking, and I'm still very much involved. Like, I'm not going anywhere. And Mel and I, in fact, we spend almost every day together still anyway. But I'm just sort of stepping back a little bit from the actual day-to-day production. On a forklift and moving barrels around and stuff like that, just so I can go in a bit more of a play, really. So, yeah, that's it. And Mel comes from her most recent post was a place called Sutton Grange, which is sort of central Victorian Shiraz. She makes she made beautiful perfume Shiraz. Prior to that, she was settled in Great Western doing and making all the drumboard wines, which was Pinot and Chardonnay. So she's got a great experience with that as well. But she's a legend winemaker and a fantastic person, and like we were mates. So yeah, that's still going to be. I mean, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
Awesome.
Not in the cellar quite as much. That's all. Yeah.
Well, once again, thanks so much for coming. Thanks to Giant Steps and its parent company for being involved in tonight. We appreciate it, and looking forward to bigger and better things. Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you very much, guys, and have a great. What time is it over there anyway? About 7 o'clock.
Oh, it's about Negroni hour at 7:30. Yeah.
Probably good time anyway. And, yeah, thanks a bunch for jumping online. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. We'll talk to you soon. Take it easy.
Guys. Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.